What happened when an undercover CEO traded his executive title for a faded uniform at his own community theater and uncovered a toxic culture hidden beneath the applause. This isn't just a story about corporate failure. It's about courage, compassion, and the quiet strength of overlooked employees. Stay with us, because this powerful tale reveals how one man's disguise exposed injustice, sparked change, and reminded everyone that true leadership starts backstage, not in the spotlight. A crisp October wind tugged at the sleeves of Jon Pierce's jacket as he stood outside the Aurora Theater, its vintage marquee flickering between proud nostalgia and weary neglect. Years ago, he had poured heart and capital into saving this once grand venue from demolition, believing that art thrived not just through performance, but through the people who made it happen. For a while, it worked. Actors beamed, staff laughed, audiences returned. But lately, things have changed. Reports of declining morale and whispered rumors of withheld paychecks had begun creeping into his inbox. Then came an anonymous letter, a handwritten note from the mother of a former makeup artist named Marisol. Her daughter, she said, had loved her work until she spoke up about unpaid hours. Days later, she was gone. No calls returned, no explanation. She cried every night, the mother had written. She gave everything to that place, and it broke her. Jon had forwarded the letter to HR. The response? Cold formality and vague promises of internal review. He'd pushed further, but the district supervisors replied with the same line, handled, nothing urgent. But Jon felt it in his gut. This wasn't just theater politics. It was a rot, a quiet decay spreading behind curtains and costumes. He thought back to his early days, sweeping stages and hanging lights, dreaming of something better. Was this what that dream had become? With every step up the corporate ladder, had he lost sight of the ground it stood on? That night, standing under the buzzing glow of the marquee, Jon made a decision. Not another meeting, not another memo. He would go in himself, not as the CEO, as someone invisible, someone who could finally see what the reports never showed. Behind the performance, behind the scripts, there was a truth he needed to uncover. Jon Pierce knew that walking into the Aurora Theater as himself, founder, CEO, and face of the revival, would get him rehearsed greetings and artificial smiles. If he wanted the truth, he'd have to vanish into the background. So he became Gabe Lawson, a quiet, middle-aged tech assistant hired last minute through a temp agency that frequently staffed theater tech crews. His designer glasses were swapped for smudged lenses, his clean-cut beard trimmed scruffier, and his usual tailored jacket traded for a faded hoodie and cargo pants. He even added a slight limp, just enough to explain his slow pace without drawing too much attention. A former lighting tech in his early days, Jon wasn't worried about the work. It was the people he wanted to observe. A contact in HR, one of the few he still trusted, slipped his alias into the backstage rotation schedule, assigning him to the evening shift at Stage B, the secondary black box theater known for chaotic rehearsals and understaffed crews. With its dim corridors and outdated rigging, it was far from the glamorous main stage, but it was where Jon suspected the fractures ran deepest. As Gabe, he wouldn't be expected to lead or advise. He would hang lights, coil cables, and sweep up sawdust with the rest of the ghost crew that kept the place standing. It wasn't about playing a role, it was about removing the mask of authority to finally see what lay behind everyone else's. Jon's first evening as Gabe began in the cluttered wings of Stage B, where the scent of sawdust and scorched gels hung heavy in the air. The crew moved with the kind of mechanical urgency born of underfunding and overbooking, barely speaking, heads down, shoulders hunched from too many thankless hours. The tech booth lights flickered, the backstage intercom buzzed intermittently, and no one looked twice at the new guy tightening bolts on the overhead rig. Gabe's assigned mentor was a soft-spoken stagehand named Nina, in her early 30s, with a gait that suggested she'd spent years on her feet with little rest. She offered a quiet, "Watch the third ladder, it wobbles," then turned back to organizing tangled cords without further conversation. Over the course of the evening, Jon observed more than he contributed. A young spotlight operator named Jordan rubbed his temples between cues, muttering about triple shifts. A carpenter barked at a set designer for misplacing tools, then later apologized under his breath. Both clearly on edge. Backstage banter was minimal, and when it did occur, it carried a weariness that clashed with the usual theater camaraderie Jon remembered. Even the director for that evening's rehearsal, a man named Derek, seemed to function more as a drill sergeant than a collaborator, snapping at actors, slamming his script down when cues were missed. "We don't have time for mistakes," he barked. No one argued. Jon saw it in their eyes. This wasn't a creative space anymore, it was a pressure cooker, and everyone was afraid of the next explosion. Later that week, Jon sat alone in the dim break room, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug when two voices drifted in from the hallway. It was Jordan and Nina, speaking in hushed tones near the costume closet. "Rachel's hours disappeared again," Jordan muttered. "She logged every shift last week, but payroll says there's no record." Nina sighed, the sound heavy. "It's not the first time. Derek's been doing this for months, cutting corners, fudging timesheets. HR never respond." Jon stiffened. He had suspected favoritism and burnout, but this hinted at something deeper, systemic manipulation. That afternoon, while coiling cords after rehearsal, a senior lighting tech named Raoul leaned over and said quietly, "You seem like a good guy. Just keep your head down. People who ask questions don't last long here." Jon nodded, feigning nonchalance, but inside his gut twisted. The rumors weren't whispers anymore. They were warnings, and those warnings were laced with resignation, not hope. The culture backstage had calcified into survival mode. Schedules were changed last minute, overtime hours vanished. Some staff members were mysteriously reassigned, while others were silently pushed out after minor infractions. Yet no one dared to speak up. As Jon walked past a wall of framed production posters that once celebrated the theater's legacy, he realized something chilling. This place wasn't just struggling, it was being hollowed out from the inside, and the only thing keeping it running were exhausted hands and voices too afraid to be heard. It happened during a particularly chaotic matinee performance. A touring children's troupe had booked the space for a midday showcase, and the tech team was scrambling to swap out lighting presets. Props were misplaced, and one of the smoke machines refused to shut off backstage. In the eye of the storm, Jon noticed Lisa, the young stagehand he'd shadowed during his first week, rushing back and forth between the prop dock and the main curtain. Her walkie crackling Derek, the operations manager, stood dead center by the stage left wings, barking orders into his headset with theatrical flair but offering no real help. "Lisa, where's the puppet kit? I told you to prepare it 20 minutes ago," he shouted. Lisa, visibly flushed and out of breath, held up her clipboard. "It's not on the manifest. They delivered the wrong crate." Derek didn't even glance at it. "Excuses again. You're lucky I haven't written you up already." Jon, watching from behind a curtain, clenched his jaw. The production was hanging by a thread, yet Derek seemed more concerned with asserting dominance than solving problems. Minutes later, Jon found Lisa crouched behind a set piece, hands trembling as she fumbled with Velcro straps on a costume bag. Her eyes were glassy, her breathing shallow. "He's going to blame me for all of it," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else, even though I've done everything, every damn thing. That was the moment it cracked wide open for Jon. It wasn't just incompetence, it wasn't just mismanagement. It was cruel, slow, silent, and calculated. Lisa, like so many others, had given everything to this theater, and in return, she'd been pushed to the edge. Jon crouched beside her, voice low. "You didn't fail. The system did." Her eyes flicked to him, unsure, but in that moment Jon saw not just exhaustion, but the flicker of someone waiting, hoping, for someone to finally say it out loud. That night, Jon didn't clock out quietly. He left with a plan. If no one else was going to fight for people like Lisa, he would. And he wouldn't be wearing a name tag when he did. After that chaotic performance, Jon couldn't shake the image of Lisa, shaking, unheard, and nearly broken behind the curtain. It wasn't enough to confront Derek with feelings or vague accusations. If Jon was going to fix this, he needed undeniable proof. Over the next few days, he quietly expanded his duties, volunteering to help sort archival props in the admin loft, offering to assist with inventory in the tech booth, and taking the late-night cleanup shifts Derek typically assigned to the new hires. He learned that most of the staff clocked out hours before they were done working. their unpaid overtime hidden in favor hours Derek promised would be made up next month. It was theft, cloaked in false gratitude and thin threats. One night, while sweeping under the audience risers, Jon discovered a discarded logbook, a slim, tattered binder filled with handwritten notes by stage managers over the past year. There, in scrawled ink and post-it flags, was the pattern. Equipment failures left unfixed, safety hazards ignored, and multiple accounts of Derek overriding scheduling protocols and deleting time logs. The most chilling entry came from someone named Rachel P. It was dated 6 months prior and read, "Spoke to Derek about missing pay, told me to drop it or risk my job, documenting my records just in case." 2 weeks later, there were no more notes from Rachel. She was gone. Jon tucked the binder under his hoodie and walked home with the weight of it pressing into his ribs. This wasn't just managerial neglect. It was systemic abuse disguised as theater tradition. Underpaid artistry. Passion weaponized. He scanned every document, every note, and cross-referenced them with the current shift board. Half the cast and crew had similar stories. Now he had more than whispers. He had names, dates, and patterns. And once he had it all organized, he made one final decision. The curtain would fall for Derek. And when it did, the whole company would be there to see it. The reveal came during the Friday evening curtain call, with a sold-out house buzzing and the backstage hallways unusually tense. Word had already begun to spread. Someone from corporate was in the building. Derek strutted through the wings, with forced confidence, snapping orders and tossing half-hearted compliments to the performers. But the real performance was just beginning. As the cast bowed and the audience erupted into applause, Jon stepped from the wings. Not in a crew's shirt, but in a pressed blazer and polished shoes. Gasps rippled through the ensemble. Lisa froze mid-step. Derek's smirk faltered. "I'd like a moment," Jon said, voice carrying across the stage, not as Greg the Temp but as Jonathan Holloway, founder and CEO of the Majestic Theater Group. Silence swallowed the space. "For the past 2 weeks I've worked beside you all," he continued. "I've seen the exhaustion in your eyes. I've heard your stories about missing wages, threats, and a culture of fear. I came here because reports didn't match what we promised this theater would stand for. Now I know why." Derek stepped forward, his face darkening. "This is a stunt." Jon raised a hand, cutting him off. "No, Derek, this is accountability." He pulled a small folder from his coat. "These are time card discrepancies, payroll gaps, staff complaints you ignored, and in some cases buried." Security entered from stage left, summoned earlier by Jon's call. "You're being placed on administrative leave pending investigation," Jon said calmly, "effective immediately." As Derek was escorted off stage, a stunned hush gave way to tentative applause. Lisa looked at Jon, stunned. He simply nodded. The theater's lights dimmed, but something brighter had been reignited among the crew. Belief, not just in the magic of the stage, but in the power of someone finally standing up. The day after the reveal, the backstage corridors of the Grandlight felt noticeably different, lighter, quieter, but pulsing with something new, possibility. Jon didn't return to his office or send a memo from corporate. Instead, he showed up in a simple button-down and slacks, joining the morning crew, briefing not as CEO, but as someone ready to listen. He pulled up a folding chair beside Lisa and the tech team, asking, "What needs to change first?" For a moment, no one spoke, unsure if this was genuine. Then, Miguel quietly mentioned outdated safety gear. Lisa added that schedules were posted too late to plan childcare. One by one, others found their voice. Jon took notes, not with performative nods, but with genuine attention. He paused to ask clarifying questions, thanked each person by name and promised a follow-up. Later, he walked the fly rail with the rigging crew, helped repaint scuffed risers, and sat in on the costume department's weekly planning huddle. He didn't direct, he participated. He also reopened a long-forgotten suggestion box, this time digitized and anonymous, with responses routed directly to his desk. Within days, over 30 entries came in. Jon read every one. Trust didn't rebuild overnight, but the cracks in the wall began to close. Smiles reappeared in the break room. Crew members lingered to chat after shift. And for the first time in months, people believed someone at the top saw them, not just as labor, but as people. Jon wasn't just promising change, he was proof that it could happen. With the immediate crisis addressed, Jon turned his focus toward deeper, systemic changes. He met with Lisa, Miguel, and several veteran crew members to identify pain points that had long gone unaddressed. The first priority, predictable scheduling. No more last-minute call-ins or phantom hours. All shifts would now be posted a full week in advance and confirmed digitally. Next, he introduced a fair rotation system for high-demand roles, ensuring no one was left with only grueling late-night cleanups or thankless understudy prep. He also mandated a comprehensive payroll audit, uncovering years of unpaid overtime that had quietly slipped through cracks. Those affected, including Rachel, whose departure had first triggered suspicion, were issued retroactive compensation. Jon didn't stop at compliance. He implemented a new oversight policy. All time cards and schedule adjustments would now be reviewed by a third-party payroll advisor. Most importantly, Jon launched the Ensemble Voice Committee, an elected team of stagehands, ushers, tech crew, and performers who would meet monthly with leadership to raise concerns, suggest improvements, and provide anonymous feedback. The committee had real influence, not symbolic gestures. Within weeks, changes were visible. Staff turnover slowed, performance quality stabilized, and most notably the break room's bulletin board filled, not with warnings or empty slogans, but thank you notes, shift swaps approved without drama, and photos of cast and crew celebrating each other. For the first time in a long time, the Grandlight didn't just feel like a workplace, it felt like a company that had finally learned how to care. A month after Jon revealed his identity and began rebuilding trust, something remarkable happened. The Grandlight staged its most successful community showcase in years. The lobby buzzed with families, aspiring performers, and retired alumni, all invited to celebrate a new era. Backstage, the atmosphere brimmed, not with fear, but with purpose. Lisa coordinated transitions with confidence. Miguel, once invisible, managed the lighting board like a seasoned pro. Even Carly, still learning the ropes, led a group of local teens on a behind-the-scenes tour. Jon watched from the wings, dressed not in a suit but in a crew tee, headset tucked around his neck. When the curtain rose and the audience erupted in applause, it wasn't just for the cast. It was for what the Grandlight had become. The theater wasn't perfect yet. There were still gaps to fill, repairs to make, but the heart was back. After the final bow, as the house lights warmed the stage, Jon stepped forward to thank the crew personally. "You made this happen," he said simply. "This is your encore." No one needed a memo to know the truth. The Grandlight was no longer just a place of performance. It was, once again, a place of belonging. The story of Jon Riemer and the Grandlight Theater teaches us that true leadership begins with humility, not hierarchy. For too long, Jon had led from a distance, relying on reports, emails, and secondhand updates to assess the health of his business. But it wasn't until he stepped on the stage as a disguised stagehand that he saw the truth, a workplace running on fear, favoritism, and silent burnout. The most powerful lesson came not from a spreadsheet, but from witnessing quiet resilience, the way Lisa endured, how Miguel remained kind despite being overlooked, how Carly whispered truths that others were too afraid to say. These were not acts of rebellion, they were acts of survival, and more importantly, of quiet heroism. By listening, showing up, and taking responsibility, Jon transformed not only the culture of the Grandlight but also his own understanding of what it means to lead. The story reminds us that respect cannot be mandated and dignity cannot be delayed. Leadership is not about controlling outcomes, it's about empowering people. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to trade status for silence, ego for empathy, and distance for presence to start the standing ovation that truly matters.